Welcome to the Connection is the Medicine podcast. I'm your host, Eden Shante. Today I welcome environmental activist turned water wizard, Nevin Eckert. In this episode, we'll explore Nevin's roots among the giant sequoias of California, his entry into the radical environmental group Earth First, his exploration of organic farming, permaculture, and biodynamics, and then finding his place as a water wizard. Nevin is an expert on creating water systems that purify and energize H2O. Without further ado, let's dive right into the show. Connection is the medicine. Welcome to Connection is the Medicine, and I am grateful to welcome a friend and what I would consider a water wizard, Nevin Eckert, to the show. And let's just begin in part one talking about your life story and your early connection to nature. And then in part two, we're going to talk about water and your relationship with water. I also want to share that how I came to meet Nevin is that my wife Deva and I were creating a project down in Costa Rica, and we wanted to put in a really wonderful water purification system. But it was important to us not just to purify the water, but to energize it. And so a big part of part two and Nevin's share is going to be understanding the spirituality and the energetics of water. Welcome, Nevin.
Thank you, Eden. Thank you for having me. Grateful to be here and honored.
Thank you. Yeah. How about if we begin with you sharing some of your early life experiences and your connection to the natural world?
I was born and raised in California. My middle brother and I were born in LA. And shortly thereafter, we moved up to Sacramento, California. And that's where 9 years later, my little brother was born. And my mom and dad were both from Napa, California. And my mother's side, my father's side, they were avid, nature people. They more so on my father's side, but on my mother's side too. We experienced family camping trips, going up into the mountains and camping in the old canvas Sears and Roebuck tent, with the big metal poles that held it up.
I remember those.
And then fishing with my grandfather. He was a very avid fisherman and kept a 20-foot fishing boat in Bodega Bay. And then camping trips with my Aunt Melanie and Uncle Ron and my cousins. And we did backpacking trips and horse packing trips up into the Sierras. As a family, we had rafts. So in Sacramento, there's the American River and the Sacramento River, and we did a lot of river rafting together as a family. And then in 76, my father got a new job down in the Southern Sierras in Sequoia, Kings Canyon, and Tulare County on the Tule River, home of the second largest reservation in California, the Tule Indian Reservation, home of Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park and Sequoia National Forest and the Golden Trout Wilderness area. We had a new house built in a rural neighborhood on about 3 acres, and all the neighbors had at least 3 acres and horses, and there was bridle paths for horseback riding that wove in between the streets and throughout the neighborhoods. It was quite magical. We had to landscape the house ourselves. So this was the summer between 3rd and 4th grade. The chore of that summer was planting all the trees, building the chicken coop, the fencing the pasture for horses, planting the landscape, the orchard, the garden, the grapevines along the fence. That was really magical for me to have my hands in the soil. I have a picture of myself planting my first tree in front of the house. But my father went to great extents to design and create a really beautiful landscape in the front yard. It was amazing. And as kids, there was a pretty loose rein from our parents. So we were allowed to just wander and go out and play. And just over the hill, there were
the good old days.
It was the good old days. We had just down the road, not even a mile, was the river. Across the hill and down the hill through the avocado orchard was some bass ponds, probably about 20 acres of bass ponds where we could go fish. And then bordering the whole neighborhood was grassy oak with big granite rock formations. And we would boulder and wander and play in the countryside adjacent to the rural neighborhood. I kind of found my place really on the land, caring for the gardens, caring for the animals. I guess it was probably about 6th grade. I started not liking school. And that created a lot of tension between myself and my parents because I didn't like the schoolwork. And my escape from it all was going fishing, horseback riding, working in the garden, taking care of the horses and the pigs and the sheep and the chickens. All of that was my escape from the schoolwork. And eventually my folks, they kind of came around to just accepting that this is how Nevin is going to be. To some extent, I was, supported in my aspirations to be out in nature, to bicycle, to cross-country ski, to hike and backpack, to make friends with the local Sierra Club. The condition was these activities and things I had to support myself in doing. So if I wanted new skis or a new bike or new backpacking equipment, I had to work to buy those things for myself.
Sounds good.
It was really good. So it's built a strong work ethic within me. And it created opportunities for me. We worked in the orange groves, my brother and I, picking oranges and grapefruits, whitewashed fences, took care of the neighbors' dogs. Anything we could do to hustle some cash, we were out, especially myself, was out there doing it. It's probably 6th, 7th grade. I picked up the local newspaper and it said cone gatherers wanted, $20 a bushel. And I was like, wow, this sounds cool. And so I called him up, and his name was Larry, and he had a seed company called Hard Scrabble Seed Company. And he was pretty renowned. And actually his father was a renowned historian of the area, had written the book Men of the Mammoth Mountains, which was a history of the settlers and the Native Americans on the Tule River.
Can you give us a sense, Nevin, for those that aren't familiar with California?
Yeah.
Essentially, what big areas or cities is it near, and how far east or west?
Yes. So from LA, it's about 3 hours north and east. So the Sierra Nevada range runs, from like Redding all the way down to Bakersfield. It's a huge mountain range that runs north and south. On the east side is Mount Whitney, which is the tallest mountain in California. So where I grew up, Springville and the Tule River is pretty much due west of Mount Whitney on the other side of the Sierra Nevada range. So to the north of us is Yosemite National Park and Tahoe. And then south of there, closer to the cities of Fresno. And then 20 miles inland at the foot of the Sierra Nevada range is Springville, the little town of 1,000 people where I went to elementary school and worked a lot.
And you were saying that was an area where there were a lot of sequoia trees.
The most groves of giant sequoia trees in the world are located there. Sequoia National Forest, Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park. And you have your coastal redwoods, the Sequoia sempervirens, that extend from, Santa Cruz all the way up to the Oregon border. And then you have the Sequoia giganteums, which is a completely different species of redwood or sequoia that range all the way from the Kern Canyon all the way up to close to Tahoe. There's a grove that's just north of Yosemite. Sequoia Kings Canyon has groves of giant sequoias that many, many, many people have never seen or experienced. There's no trails into them. It's one of the hidden, unknown jewels of California.
And these trees, the sequoias, are some of the oldest and biggest on planet Earth, right?
They are. In prehistoric times, actually the earth was covered first with redwood trees. It was like the tree before other trees. It was the primordial tree that covered the whole earth, and then other trees evolved and grew after the original existence of the sempervirens and the giganteums.
Wow, did not know that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So bushels and seed and cone gathering.
And cone gatherings. So,
tell us about that.
Oh my gosh. I was like, Mom, Dad, can I go gather cones with Larry, the cone seed man? And they said, sure. And so Dad took me and we met at the donut shop in Springville at 6:00 in the morning. And Larry took me up to the Black Mountain Grove, which is right on the edge of Tule Indian Reservation. And it was magical. That grove at that time really had never been touched. And the unique thing about the giant sequoias is that they're federally protected. It's against the law to cut down a giant sequoia. Yet, unfortunately, the old growth whitewoods, cedars, pines, firs that surround the giant sequoias are not protected. I was fortunate to experience some of these groves that were not in the park, in the national park. They were on Forest Service land before they cut all the whitewood trees from around them. So this was a very magical time. It was fall, probably 1979. We go out into the forest with our burlap sacks and plastic 5-gallon buckets, and we're looking for the squirrel stashes. So the chicories are the very small native squirrels. They're actually smaller than a chipmunk. And part of their mating ritual in the fall is to create these stashes of cones, giant stashes of cones. And so we'd just be wandering through the forest and looking for green cone stashes under the big giant sequoia redwood trees. And we would find them. And, it was very exciting. And I can remember yelling out, jackpot, and under a given tree, we'd maybe find, anywhere from, 10 to 20 bushels of cones under one given tree. It was a magical experience. And coming up on the chicories working actively, cutting the cones, that was a phenomenal Zen experience of, the giant sequoia cones. They're very hard, like rocks, and dense.
It's before they splay open, right? They're packed.
They're packed. They don't splay open until the warmer temperatures occur. So when they're cut, they're super tight. They're super hard, like rocks, and they're pretty much indestructible.
So this was what time of year?
In the fall.
This was the stashes of the chicories. And they were storing all this for the winter.
Really, they didn't eat many of the cones. It was really part of their mating ritual that they were doing this.
Mating ritual.
Yes.
Okay.
So,
so you weren't stealing their food, so to speak.
No, absolutely not. We were, as a kid, I was concerned about that. And I actually, asked Larry, what are we taking their food? Are we stealing from them? And he's like, no, no, no. There's so many cones. And I can remember actually, going up and gathering all the cones in a spot and then coming back a few weeks later and finding that they had filled it all back up again. It was a harmonious relationship between us and the squirrels and the trees. And the giant sequoias, Sequoia giganteums, are very special in reforestation internationally. So much of Asia, much of Europe has all been reforested with giant sequoia. You go to places like Germany, England, Scotland, you see giant sequoias everywhere.
Is it because of its ability to grow in different regions or climates?
It is. They grow pretty much. I mean, I've seen giant sequoias in Santa Fe, New Mexico. One of the largest planted giant sequoias I've ever seen was on Vancouver Island, British Columbia, in front of the Parliament building. One of the special things about giant sequoias is they're highly resistant to acid rain, and they're highly drought resistant as well, naturally. So as long as they get a lot of water when they're younger, and once they get established, they're good to go.
Wow. And so Larry was selling the seeds.
He sold the seeds.
All over the world.
All over the world. All over the world. It just became such an adventure for me, and my brother joined in, and some neighbor boys joined in, and pretty soon I had a whole little crew of young men that went out into the forest and gathered cones for Larry.
And so what was the next impactful connection with nature that you can remember from your youth?
Well, my neighbor that lived across the street from us, he was a forest baron from Northern California, from Scotia. And when I say a forest baron, I mean he bought and sold large tracts of private forest. And his last acquisition was 1,500 acres of private forest. It was an inset parcel that butted up on the backside to the national park, to the Sequoia Kings Canyon National Park and the Golden Trout Wilderness area. And you had to travel 6 miles of one of the most rugged roads I've ever experienced in my life. It was essentially a riverbed the first couple of miles going in, that you're just driving over a rock bed to get in there. Yeah, Forrest Reed, he and his wife had passed away, and his son Dave inherited the land. Forrest had been in cahoots with Walt Disney in the 60s and wishing to develop a place called Mineral King, which is a 8,500-foot alpine valley surrounded by 13,000-foot peaks. And they were going to build a tunnel from the west side, from Forrest Reed's land, into Mineral King, 6 miles through the mountain, and create this Swiss-style ski resort and pump all the people from LA up into Mineral King for this Swiss ski-style experience. And the Sierra Club and David Brower said, "Oh, no, you won't," and sued them. And the project never happened. And Mineral King became part of the national park at that time. So that's a little bit of the background on Dillonwood. And I guess it was my summer after 8th grade. I had already been doing some work like cutting firewood and had some connections, locally with landscapers and that sort of thing. And, I had a little bit of a reputation of being a really hard worker. Forrest connected me with his son, and I went up to Dillonwood and spent a lot of my summers in high school caretaking and working and hanging out on Dillonwood, which was just an amazing experience to have so much forest, be so deeply immersed in nature, often all by myself. I camped out. I set up a tent and stayed up there. That was magical.
Would you stay up there in the summer for
I did.
Weeks at a time?
I would stay up there a couple weeks at a time. So
And then come back home?
And then come back home. Jack, also, I can't remember Jack's last name, but he worked for Dave as well. And he had a family and everything, so he didn't stay up there, but he would commute in his Volkswagen and work with me on the property. And Dave would too. He had his family there in Springville, and he'd stay up there as well. There was a cabin, one main cabin that he and his family would stay in. Just no electricity, no telephone. We had cold running water from a pipe that was put in the creek nearby. Propane lights inside of his cabin. I just had a tent that first year, and there was another cabin there, but it was really run down, and it wasn't until my sophomore year that I decided, to fix up that old cabin and make it for myself. So the first summer was it all tenting, and then the next summer I stayed in the old, I think it was like a hunting cabin or a logger's cabin or something that was there.
So what were some of your more potent experiences that happened at Dillonwood?
Hanging out with the bears was really like the first thing. One of my responsibilities was to keep the gates locked and just be a presence to keep the bear poachers out. So we all loved the bears, and unfortunately, that part of California, a lot of parts of California were very plagued with bear poachers and bear poaching.
Were these black, brown?
Black bears. Yeah, that's all that's left there.
Yeah.
Are the black bears. There once used to be grizzlies, of course. I mean, the California flag is of a grizzly bear. The Reed family kept 2 Akitas, which are an ancient Japanese breed that is pretty much fearless of bears. And in ancient Japan, they utilized the Akitas to babysit the children while they worked in the fields. And on Dillonwood, we had two big Akitas, Sunny and Raja, and they created a Zen relationship between themselves, us, and the bears, making it so that the bears didn't come into the human space. The bears just kind of learned from the dogs that that's a zone that they don't trespass into. And in the evenings, I would go out with Sunny and Raja and either sit by the creek or find an old redwood tree stump to sit on and just observe the bears and watch the families of bears, migrate through the woods and hang out. And we had a real respect for one another. Loved watching them frolic and the cubs play with each other and the mother and the father. And, I had names for them. I could identify and would see the same families of bears, throughout the course of the summer and the following summer. Mm-hmm. So that was very, very, very special to me to have that relationship with the bears there.
On that 1,500 acres of Dillonwood,
mm-hmm.
How many bears was that home for?
I would guess there was probably at least, 30 bear. It wasn't something to ever be afraid of. It was just something to be respected.
Do you think that if you didn't have those 2 dogs, the dynamics would have been different between you and the bears, or?
Definitely. Absolutely. I do think it would have been different. I think the bears would have been, more inclined to, to trespass on the cabins and break into the cabins and cars and, create a little bit of a nuisance, as bears can sometimes do. But the Akitas, they would run them off.
Oh, they would?
They would.
Okay.
They would run them off from that area. So if a bear did come in and the dogs were there, the dogs would chase them away.
Tell me about the poaching that would happen on the property and how that made you feel.
Yeah, it was really heart-wrenching to know that, these bears were being taken for their parts by the black market, essentially. The poachers were fathers of boys and girls that I grew up with in elementary school in our small town of 1,000 people. And, they were poaching for the money, for the gallbladders and the paws, basically. And they would sell those to the Korean families, Asian families.
Essentially, they were selling the paws and the gallbladders to the black market in Asia.
Yes.
And these parts were used for virility or?
Yes, the gallbladders were used specifically as aphrodisiacs. I know that.
Wow. I know we chatted about this a little bit at dinner the other night, but it's so similar to how we've treated sharks.
Yes.
And the millions of sharks that are killed every year just for their fins.
Yeah.
For shark fin soup in Asia or wherever they're being used. And then the rest of the animal is just dispensed.
Yes. I'd find a poached bear and it would be just, most of it would be there, but its paws and its gallbladder weren't.
And so you were there for a couple of summers.
I was there my summer between 8th grade and high school, and my freshman year, my sophomore year, my junior year, and actually some of my the summer after my senior year, I was there a little bit too. So caretaking the place and working. Dillonwood had been cut of some of its big giant Sequoia redwoods at the turn of the century. And back then, all they had were, donkey engines, steam engines, and teams of oxen. So when they cut down one of those big trees back then, often they were unable to bring it down to the valley. Dillonwood, the private forest, was littered with trees that had been cut at the turn of the century, or pieces of the trees that had been cut at the turn of the century. So Dave made a business of salvaging the wood from the forest floor that was left behind from the loggers.
And then I remember you sharing that you took a break and you came back and you found a lot of poached bears.
Yes. There were.
When did that happen?
That was 1989. Yeah. I left Springville and in my hometown, and I was gone for 2 years, traveling and working. And during that time, my folks moved up to Northern California. I came back to caretake Dillonwood for Dave one more time, and there hadn't been a caretaker there for 2 years, and all the bears that were family to me were gone. Angered me deeply. And
a lot of grief,
a lot of anger, a lot of wanting to lash out at the poachers and get back at them, and to somehow stop the poaching as well. And before I came back in 89, there were skirmishes that I had with the poachers. I had a couple of friends, older gentlemen, Othel Pearson, who was at Wounded Knee, and Caleb Layton. He was a nuclear physicist that decided he didn't want to be a nuclear physicist and wanted to be a hippie, and had moved there and just grew pot and cut firewood and that sort of thing. And we became friends, but both Othel and Caleb despised the poachers. And in those earlier years, we had some skirmishes with the poachers. I'll just say that much. There was already contention between myself and my friends and the poachers even before I came back in 89 and had discovered, all the bears that had been taken. So,
were you after high school at this time when you came back?
Yeah, this is after high school. I was 21 when I had come back. So while I was away, I had a lot of enlightening and deeper connecting experiences, and waking up more and more and more to the natural world, and deepening of my connection to the natural world, discovering a purpose and a need to speak for the natural world and be a voice for the natural world, and to actually defend the natural world. The second year that I was away was spent in Northern California, up in Humboldt County. So this was 1988. I came back to California after being away for a year. My folks were in a new house in Northern California. It was Thanksgiving. My uncle and aunt were there, and I didn't have anything to do or a place to go. And they said, well, why don't you come live with us? Orleans on the Klamath River is a magical, magical place. The creek that my uncle still lives on is called Slate Creek, and it's one drainage upstream from Bluff Creek, which is where the most Bigfoot sightings and the first Bigfoot sighting happened, the Patterson incident. And Orleans had a wonderful community of organic farmers as well. Back then, too, were also pot growers, back when it was highly illegal. I made friends with a lot of the organic farmers and working on organic farms, and that led me to being exposed to things like environmentalism and the ideas of protecting the earth and protecting the animals. And back then, there was an organization called Earth First. And I didn't really know what it was. Some of the one of my organic farmers' friend had a sticker, had an Earth First sticker, and I thought that was really cool. Just the whole idea of the Earth First. No compromise in the defense of Mother Earth was their slogan. You know, they were known for protesting, doing a lot of civil disobedience, and monkey wrenching, which monkey wrenching meant going in and actually like sabotaging the logging equipment to stop and to protect the forest. You know, there was Earth First groups all over the country back then. The seeds were planted for me, the seeds of consciousness, the seeds of connectedness, the seeds of purpose were planted in my consciousness. And I went back to Dillonwood, witnessed what had happened with the bears specifically, also to the giant sequoia groves that I had worked in as well. Many of them had been cut. And that was very disturbing to me, to go back and see these groves be dismembered, you know, of their cousins, you know, the whitewoods, the firs and pines and cedars. Just intuitively knew and felt and sensed that would disrupt the natural ecology of those ancient redwood trees, of the entire forest. It just didn't make sense to me. A lot of things, even earlier on as a child, you know, things like cars didn't make sense to me. You know, I resonated with like riding in a train or riding a horse. Even agriculturally, you know, working in the orange groves, we were exposed to a lot of chemicals back in the 70s. And I actually got my immune system pretty severely whacked by chemicals that long since have been banned, that I was exposed to working in the orange groves.
I bet.
There were seeds of consciousness that were happening for me even as a child, you know, working in the orange groves and being exposed to the chemicals and just seeing the world in a way that I couldn't identify with and didn't resonate with, you know. And I think that was a lot of why I didn't do well in school, or didn't want to do well in school. It seemed kind of meaningless to me, honestly. And that was rooted in my connection to the natural world. My mom told me when I was 5 years old, she asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. And I told her a farmer. That's interesting and tells a little bit about my character and in essence, who I am as a person, how I came in. Let's circle back to, you know, 89, 22 years old, had some seeds of consciousness planted within me. definitely feeling a lot of connection to the natural world. But I didn't really have any mentors or teachers or kind of spiritual support in all this. This was all just my intuitive self guiding me to being conscious and compassionate and caring and seeing the forest for more than just the trees.
Yeah. And so you spent some time learning about organic farming in Humboldt, California.
Yes. Up in Humboldt, I got exposed to organic farming and biodynamic farming.
Okay. In the
Those
lineage of Rudolf Steiner.
And Rudolf Steiner, yes.
But something led you back to Dillonwood.
Yes, I had these fantasies about spending the rest of my life there. It became obvious that the owner, Dave, didn't share those ideas.
Yeah.
And I could see that he was definitely more so of the logger type mentality, cutting trees that I didn't feel like they needed to be cutting. That last year there was not easy. I did end up wintering over that year, just maintaining a presence there as much as I could to keep the bear poachers out. And that leads into another story, of course, of wanting to stop the bear poaching. And because of my exposure to environmentalism, I decided to reach out to animal rights organizations, specifically the Fund for Animals in Cleveland, Amory, back east in Maryland. I contacted them. They sent out a private investigator, documented the bear poaching that was going on at that time, and they sued the state of California and put a moratorium on bear hunting in California that year.
And so you played a role in that.
I played a
process.
Role in that process, definitely.
Wow.
Yeah.
So when you did this investigative work, was this before or after you became more involved with Earth First?
That was the first thing that I did as an activist, was working with Fund for Animals and creating the evidence that they needed to sue the state of California and put a moratorium on bear hunting that year.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Well, I bet you protected a few bears.
I did. And I sent a message out that this wasn't cool. And this wasn't going to be accepted. And there was going to be people fighting this, and there was going to be consequences for those atrocities that were being perpetrated on the animals. So
before we move into your experience with Earth First, I remember from our talk that we had the other night that you had some experiences in the woods where you heard some voices and such. And I think it's important to share that now, because that foreshadows some things that you're going to talk about later.
Yes. It was my sophomore year of high school, the summer. I was caretaking Dillonwood. A normal practice in the evenings was to go hang out with the bears or sit by the creek, be quiet and still, basically, in the forest, and just merge and hang out with the nature. And when I did that, I heard an old German man's voice call my name, my first name, which is Brian. Been going by my middle name for about almost 20 years now. But then it was Brian, really heavy, masculine German man's voice calling Brian, Brian, Brian. And the only other thing that he said to me was grander, grander, grander.
And you had no idea what that meant.
I had no idea what that meant at all. And I didn't know where it was coming from. I'd never had any sort of dimensional experience like that before, though when I was much younger, I did see a UFO with my little brother and the neighbors. And we did watch the show In Search Of. Remember that with Leonard Nimoy?
Yeah.
So, I was kind of open to dimensional things. And, my uncle had seen Bigfoot, and watching Leonard Nimoy and In Search Of, I was just like, yeah, things like that, Loch Ness Monster, UFOs, Bigfoot, they're all real. I loved that sort of stuff. I kind of had a little bit of a passion for those sort of things. My consciousness was open enough that I had that sophomore year, I was hearing this old German man's voice calling my name and whispering to me grander.
And it was quiet out there.
It was super quiet.
And you weren't distracted.
I was not distracted by anything. I was almost in a meditative state, actually, before I knew what meditation actually was.
What did you feel in your body, in your mind, in your heart when this German voice was calling your name? What were you thinking and feeling?
I kind of thought I was, just like going a little crazy, hearing things that I shouldn't be hearing,
Did it scare you?
At that time, those times, maybe slightly, it did scare me a little bit, just because I felt out of control of things, like there was an element at work that I couldn't understand and didn't have any control of. So yeah, that was a little scary, but it happened, probably 4 to 6 times that summer. I never said anything to anyone about it, kept it to myself. And in my junior year, it happened again. And
I've got chills. And they're multiplying.
It happened again. And at that point in time, I got really anxious when it started occurring again. I reasoned with myself and I said, dude, don't worry about it. Someday it'll make sense. No sense in getting all excited and uptight about this. It'll reveal itself at some time later on. Mm-hmm. It didn't happen anymore after that. Mm-hmm. That was one of my definitely second dimensional experience. The first one was seeing a UFO with my little brother and the neighbors. And then after that was hearing the old German man's voice. Mm-hmm. The summer that I lived up in Humboldt, my uncle's, I had a Bigfoot experience myself.
Really?
I did.
Wow. What do you want to share about that, Nevin?
It was pretty magical, and it was pretty connected in that I was just fascinated with Bigfoot. And a few weeks before I had my experience, I was talking with a Native American friend of mine who also worked on the organic farms. And I asked him, I said, what's the Hupa knowledge about the Bigfoot? What's their ancient story according to the Hupa tribe about the Bigfoots? Mm-hmm. And he explained to me that they are dimensional beings that protect entrances to the underworld.
Wow. I didn't know that about Bigfoot.
I did not either.
Wow.
I did not either. That they can basically travel and merge from one dimension to another. Mm-hmm. Some like sort of a time traveler or something, but more of a
time and space
dimensional traveler.
Yeah.
That's what stuck with me from what my friend shared with me. And I was like, oh, wow, that's really fascinating. And another important piece that we should share, in that first year that I traveled away, before I came back to California, in those 2 years that I was gone, I spent some time with my Uncle David, who was very deeply involved in TM and transcendental meditation.
Yeah.
So I spent some time with them. They were actually living in and running the TM Center in Ann Arbor, Michigan. Mm-hmm. And I spent a few months with them and was initiated into TM. I brought that back with me when I came back to California, had Thanksgiving with my uncle. My uncle invited me up to his remote home off of the Klamath River on Slate Creek.
Okay.
Built a deck out in the forest and had my tent set up on my deck. And that year I was doing all kinds of different stuff. I was working on organic farms. I was planting trees. I was growing pot with Rex. one evening after I had this talk with my friend, I had asked him about Bigfoot. It's about 2 weeks later, meditating in my tent around dusk.
Mm-hmm.
And the spot where I had my tent set up, or Rex's property, is very, very steep. It's probably like 12% grade. My encampment was just on a little bench on the hillside. And I'm coming out of my meditation, and all of a sudden I hear and feel the impact of these enormous footsteps.
Wow.
Boom, boom, boom. And actually my whole deck and tent platform shook with the impact of each footstep.
I just got full body chills, Nevin.
Oh my gosh, I'm getting them too, Eden. It was intense. It was, I mean, all the hair on my body was standing on end, and I knew that because I had been inquiring and I wanted to know that somehow there was a connection, a cosmic conscious connection that was felt by the Bigfoots, and they wanted to say, yeah, we are here and we do travel through dimensions. And it was just walking through the forest right next to my tent. And what confirmed to me that it was a dimensional being was that it just appeared out of nowhere. And if it hadn't been a dimensional being, I would have heard it for a really long distance coming.
Because of how loud it
was and how steep the still hillsides were there too.
Right.
So essentially the Bigfoot materialized, took some steps close to where I was, close enough to make the deck shake, and then disappeared.
Was there any sighting, or was it more of a felt heard experience?
It was a felt heard experience. It was the fall. There was a deep layer of leaves on the floor, on the forest floor, on the duff. And I had my dog with me. He was napping underneath the deck, came out of my tent. I tried to get my dog to come out, but he was terrified. He would not come out from underneath the deck.
So he wasn't doing a whole barking thing.
Oh no, he was terrified. He was just frozen and would not come out. So that was my Bigfoot experience. Yeah. My second or third dimensional experience, I guess it would have been. That was a magical year there. Went back to Dillonwood.
When did the UFO experience happen? I know
that was like 78.
I want to get to the Earth First activism for sure, but
that was back in
I
78.
didn't know about Bigfoot and I didn't know about the UFO. So like
the UFO, my little brother and I were on an evening pony cart ride through the neighborhood. And the neighbors...
What does that mean, a pony cart ride?
We had a pony cart. We had a pony that we'd harness up, and a little buggy, 2-wheeled buggy that it pulled us in behind the pony.
And those were your wheels?
Those were my wheels. One of my...
You and your brother?
Me and my little brother. Just had been out for an evening pony cart ride through the neighborhood.
Okay.
And we were just turning off the street into our yard.
Yeah.
And the neighbors were out working in their yard, doing some yard work. And I looked from where we lived. There was a beautiful view of the San Joaquin Valley. So you could see all the way up to the north towards Sacramento, and you could see south down towards Bakersfield in LA. On a good day, back then, frequently, you could see the Coast Range as well, all the way across the valley. You could see the Coast Range. As we were turning into our property, I looked up, and at the north end of the valley was this huge white ball of sparkly light with a rainbow sparkly tail behind it. At about, probably, I'm guessing it was probably at about 20,000 feet.
Wow.
And it was zipping down the valley towards LA. I mean, within 10 seconds, it had gone from one end of the valley all the way to the other.
Mm-hmm.
And as it came close to LA, it accelerated and shot into LA. Yeah.
And did you notice that it had quite a different flight pattern or characteristic than any of the craft that you'd been used to seeing in those skies?
Oh yeah, it was a white ball of sparkly light, Eden.
Are you sure this wasn't the first Pride Month
No,
with the rainbow tail?
no, this is 1978. 1978, and we were just like, wow, and the neighbors were like, wow, what the heck was that? It wasn't I knew what a meteorite was,
Yeah,
or shooting star, but this was so much lower.
yeah.
And it was obviously something from out of this world. And I went and called the UFO hotline. It was actually, back then there was an 800 number that you could call and report UFOs, and I did that.
Wow, I did not know about that hotline. You and I are similar ages.
Yes, we're very similar ages.
I think we're only a month apart.
We're a month apart. Yeah.
Yeah.
You're a month older than me. And
we didn't, I don't recall the suicide, the
UFO hotline.
The UFO hotline.
Yeah, there was one back then.
Wow.
And I called the UFO hotline. I called the local newspaper and reported it. And they put a little, 2-paragraph report of mine, or what I had to say about this UFO that I saw. And it was very interesting. And
so by that time, you had already had several paranormal, if that's the right term, experiences.
I had.
And you were open.
I was open. It's very open. And I believe also the meditation really helped as well. There was also some marijuana smoking going on. And actually even earlier, when I was a teenager, there was a Mexican pot that we smoked there as teenagers. So I remember one time ditching class in high school to go smoke some pots with my buddies, and I came back and I was just about to enter the high school, and this huge mandala of light appeared in front of me, of rainbow light actually. And I stood there and just stared at this. I was tripping. There may have been something more in that Mexican pot that time. So, yeah. I remember that very well. Very, very well.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Did you walk through that mandala, or did you turn around and not go back to school that day?
I ended up going on to school. The mandala was there, and I guess it just disappeared, and I went on to school.
Wow. Let's journey back to Dillonwood and coming back to this poaching and the grief and your experience and humble with the environment and organic farming and this sense of activism mixed with grief and anger about what was happening and what happened next for you.
Well, I was feeling pretty lost, that my family was no longer there anymore, my folks and my brothers. And I really didn't have any friends there. And I was feeling like a real longing or a sense of purpose in being a voice for the forest and the animals both. And I pretty much had alienated myself from Dave at Dillonwood, and I can't remember exactly what happened, but I stopped working and living up there. I actually went on to caretake another parcel. It was an apple orchard up in the mountains. Was there for a period of time, and I was just like, why am I here? I want to be an activist. I want to defend the earth. And through my connections that I had made with the Fund for Animals and Earth First, they said, hey, come on up and help us out. And at that time, there was a huge campaign to protect the redwoods in Northern California, the coastal redwoods. So Maxim Corporation was the company, and they were just going hog wild to cut down the last of the old growth redwoods in Northern California. And there was just a great, amazing group of hippies and earth firsters that rose up. It was led by two individuals, Daryl Cherney and Judy Berry. And they were the kind of the leaders of the Earth First group in Northern California at that time. And I also, went on to connect with more of the animal rights activists. There was a small group out of Santa Cruz called the Hunt Saboteurs. And our focus there was intervening in big game hunts and stopping the trophy hunting, which in California, there was trophy hunting of the bighorn sheep down in the desert. There was the trophy hunting of the elk in Northern California. And then I wanted to continue learning about organic farming. So I was spending time basically on organic farms. And that's when I got introduced to permaculture also. Was around Chico area, Oroville, California. There was a renowned, he was like he and his wife were the curators of the Permaculture Activist magazine, which is the North American publication. So Guy Baldwin and Sharon Casey, they were doing the Permaculture Activists out of their home and out of their demonstration site. Guy was doing range restoration at that time. So taking land that had been overgrazed by cattle and applying permaculture practices to restoring that land.
So tell me the year now.
This was 90, I guess it would have been.
And was this the first time you had heard about permaculture?
It was.
And how long was permaculture a thing? Because the reason I bring this up is down in Costa Rica now, permaculture and regenerative agriculture and things of this nature is really hot right now.
Yeah.
It's real big, growing. And,
yes.
But, we're talking 30, 40 years ago.
Yes.
Where'd it come from, and when did it start in the States?
Yeah, it came from Australia is where it all started. I can't remember the name of the original gentleman that started all the permaculture. There was a big hardback book called Permaculture that was available at that time. I believe, Guy and Sharon were the pioneers in North America of permaculture, probably with a few other people. The main person at that time was Guy Baldwin with his permaculture activists.
So you were really at the forefront of this.
Getting to learn about the practices, mulching, working with the contours of the land, creating swales, all that sort of thing, we were doing on their property. And then the keyline plow and breaking up the subsoil and restoring the rangeland that had been overgrazed. That was exciting because, we'd go out and identify the contours of the land, and then the big tractor with the deep plow blades that would break that crust, that compacted part of the soil that had been compacted by the overgrazing.
Yeah.
We would plow that on the contours, do swales, and then come back and plant native oaks and other shrubs, ceanothus and that sort of thing to do range restoration.
I understand some of that. I'm learning a lot. Been introduced to biodynamics for quite a few years, that we've been incorporating that into our Healing Arts Center in Carbondale, Colorado, True Nature. And down here in Costa Rica, we've incorporated not only biodynamics, but also permaculture practices here on the 7.5 acres that we have here. And for those that don't know about our place here, it was heavily grazed. When we purchased the land 8 years ago, it was a few older trees, but predominantly 95% of the property was grass and grazing. We put a fence up, kept the cows out, and now here we are 8 years later, and it's completely reforested with jungle. It's mind-blowing. Everything was in the soil, waiting to come back.
Yes.
And it has come back, and the insects and the snakes and the birds and the butterflies and the hummingbirds and the relationships. And now we have troops of monkeys that can hang out here. And I saw my first toucan a few months back. We don't have many toucans in this neck of the woods. They're more down south near the Osa Peninsula. And we've got a whole flock of parakeets, green parakeets. And I mean, it's just amazing, letting nature that was just waiting to come back.
Yes.
To be given the opportunity to express its glory. And, here at Loma Sagrada, which means sacred knoll, it's an opportunity for Deva and I to create an inspirational educational space to have kids and older adults to come and to learn about not only spiritual practices that Deva and I really have passion for, but gardening and raising healthy food and preparing and eating healthy food. And cooking healthy food is like an art form that's been lost. And so it's this passionate opportunity to let the land speak and to listen to the land and to work with, in relationship to the land. And then to create a space for humans to come and interface with it, to learn how we can be more in harmony and how the land can produce for us and how we can become healthier through this relationship. So I just wanted to share a little bit for the people out there listening, a little bit of our backstory and my personal relationship to biodynamics and permaculture and love affair that I have with the natural world. And, that started when I was younger and was hurting in a lot of ways. And the trees were my friends. And we had this ravine behind my house, and that's where I would go. I'd go hang out with those beautiful trees, the oaks and the maples, and climb them and feel the earth and the soil. And so I really appreciate this opportunity that we're exploring right now. And I guess I share that because I want you to know that I understand some of your experience.
Thank you.
And I knew a lot about your love for water that we're going to get into, as we progress through this process, this connection, this discussion. But I didn't know all this other part of your story. And so let's continue and help us understand the heart and the soul of an environmental activist.
It was different for me because I had had the experience of working in the forest and seeing firsthand what was going on in the forest and in my daily work.
You had a relationship.
I had a relationship, and I also had like a firsthand practical experience of how the deforestation, the devastation to the forest was disturbing the forest and the natural balance. And for me, that was really in the cone harvesting. So I could see when I went back to caretake Dillonwood in 89 and going back to Black Mountain Grove, where I had worked with Larry when I was a boy, and them having cut all the whitewoods and the cedars and the pines and the firs from around the redwoods, and how that had disrupted the ecology, and how the phenomena of the chicories and the squirrels was disturbed as a result of the whole forest being disturbed.
Yeah.
For me, there was just like a real-time experience that moved me. And then, the year when I spent up on Humboldt, I could see a lot of logging, clear cutting, and devastation firsthand. The first year that I was away, I actually went to do tree planting in the Deep South. And I had all these visionary ideas that, I'm going to be planting the future forest of America. How amazing could that be as a young man? And I get down there to the pulpwood industry, and it was just disgusting and nasty and awful what was going on. And the pulpwood industry is just like a crop. So the trees grow for maybe 20, 30 years. They come through, they clear cut them all. They dose the land with chemicals, light it on fire, and then, guys like us come back through and plant trees in rows, for another crop.
Wow.
And so that was like a real eye opener, just seeing, the function and the operation of the tree industry firsthand.
The lack of care and consciousness.
Yeah.
There's a way to interface with nature and use what Spirit is providing.
Absolutely.
In a mutually beneficial alliance, in a relationship. The animals are all in relationship. The trees and the plants and the fungi and everything's in relationship. And
connection.
And humanity is really, it's just the lack of
reverence.
Yeah.
Embracing and relating and existing with the natural world as a sacred place, as everything being sacred. Native Americans, everything was sacred. Everything was sacred. The trees, the rocks, the water, the plants, the animals.
When they took a buffalo, they took a full buffalo. And there was prayer, and I can only imagine. I wasn't there in this lifetime. But they used the whole animal. It's so different than the Westerners that came in and were just taking the skin, the hide, and leaving the bison or the buffalo just to rot. Or the tongue, whatever they were taking. It's a level of extraction that's deeply adharmic, to use a yogic term. It's against dharma.
Yes.
And there's karma that's created.
Yes.
That has to be eventually received in this lifetime or another for the harm that we cause.
This connection that humanity has with the natural world is just something that I've been aware of and conscious of as a child. I didn't really know what was going on, but that's the gist of it. As a child, it just didn't make sense, the way that humanity's existing with the natural world to me. I didn't know why I had that feeling, but I did. And my journey has taken me to getting to a place of becoming pretty clear. I still have some learning to do and some experiencing and understanding, of course. I definitely feel as though I've gained some insights into recognizing the disconnect of humanity between the natural world.
Yeah.
And
Tell me about what began to unfold with Earth
with the
First
Earth
and,
First.
and some of these other organizations.
Yeah, yeah.
And this would have been in your early 20s, right?
Really, I would have been like about 22.
Okay.
I just got on the bandwagon with Daryl and Judy, and it was pretty magical, because they tried to have some fun with it too. And there was lots of songs that we would sing
Mm-hmm.
and music that we would make. Judy played the violin,
Mm-hmm.
and Daryl played the banjo. And I backed up with some harmonica, and Earth First had all their songs,
Mm-hmm.
that we would sing at the protest. So one of the very first things I was involved with was a national tree sitting week, where there were tree sitting actions all over the country. So Earth First was organizing to basically shut down logging operations in many places as they could to bring attention to the deforestation that was taking place across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And that happened with us going out and onto an active logging site and then setting up platforms in trees and staying up in the trees for days or for a week. Other things that we did would be to directly, put ourselves between the trees and the loggers, or blockade logging roads and make it so that the logging trucks couldn't get the logs out. Pretty much any kind of antic or, uh, messing with the loggers that we could do that would bring attention to the newspapers or the 6 o'clock news, we were out there trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
So another time we went and disrupted a logging equipment show. That was pretty intense. So we kind of dressed up as loggers, tried to act like we were one of them, and went in and, got on their equipment and unfurled banners and, just made a ruckus, singing songs and just disrupting their business as usual, basically, to bring national attention to the devastation of the forest. And Earth First was doing that, pretty much all over the country, especially the western part. There were Canadian Earth Firsters also. It was Earth First in Alaska. They did work in Asia, like in places like Borneo and Australia. There were Earth Firsters.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty big organization. Dave Foreman was the one who really started it and made it go. And there was a lot of things that went down, and eventually the FBI got involved, and the movement itself was very shut down very, very quickly. And for the Earth Firsters that I was working with, Daryl and Judy, it all came to a head with them being bombed, and a pipe bomb being placed under the seat of Judy's Subaru.
Mm-hmm.
And they were in Oakland. Judy lived for a few more years. She was in a wheelchair after that. Fortunately, Daryl wasn't too severely injured. Fortunately, I wasn't in the car with them, which I easily could have had been because I had been with them intensively for months. There's a documentary you can watch on Netflix. It's called Who Bombed Judy Berry. And she also wrote a book called Timber Wars. And when the bombing happened, I freaked out. I was like, this is crazy. This is way too close to home. I can't be a part of this anymore. And I was terrified. I was really scared. And
I bet.
And didn't want to be associated or putting my life at risk in that way. I don't think I was really like seeing what was happening. Part of me was very naive and really not getting the impact or the severity of my actions, or what was going on, or our actions, and how much it was really upsetting the timber industry and disturbing business as usual, and how that was such a problem for the industry. And so they had to, try to stop us one way or another. And unfortunately, that way was, the bombing. Others picked up the bandwagon and continued. And there was enormous actions that continued in Northern California after the bombing that year.
Yeah.
There was like thousands of earth firsters and hippies and organic farmers all gathered and rallied and fought and protested. And then people like Julia Butterfly, did her thing, where she was in a tree for over 2 years protesting.
Yeah.
So, when the bombing happened, I decided to hide out. I had a lot of orders and contracts for redwood cone, and I decided to go back down to my hometown in Southern Sierra, 7 hours from where all this stuff was happening in Northern California, and escape from it and just take care of myself and try to recover from the trauma of the experiences that I had as an activist, just be in the woods with the trees. And I taught myself how to climb a giant sequoia redwood tree all by myself. And I had a friend that was bringing me supplies and taking my cones that I had harvested out to the seed guy. And I was pretty well, tucked in and hiding out. And my friend Mark brings me the local newspaper, and it says Earth First coming to local forest. I had another freak out, basically. It's like, what the heck? This is following me. Who's doing this? Who are these people? And I was like, I didn't know anything about this. And that's kind of how decentralized the movement was. The San Francisco group, which I didn't have any experience and didn't know any of those people, had organized and planned this huge Earth First rendezvous for Sequoia, for the Southern Sierra, for the Tule River, where I was and where I had grown up. And the newspaper just kept sharing one side of the story, the logger side of the story, the industry side of the story. My fearlessness was stronger than I thought it was. And I just decided that the other side of the story needed to be told.
Mm-hmm.
And I called the local newspaper and said, hey, I see you're only telling one side of the story. Would you like to hear the other side? And they said, sure. And they came up to my camp and interviewed me. And that was another front page story of me, the local guy, boy that grown up there and had his history there with Dillonwood and, the loggers and the bear poachers and everything else, kind of essentially coming out of the closet. It was already a rumor that I was one of them. And I was just like, what the heck? I'm just going to come out. Boy, things got really hot then. And I got, death threats in my P.O. box and, some intense meetings at the grocery store and the gas station. I just, I went to San Francisco and met with the people that were organizing. We came back down to Sequoia. Mark and I signed the special use permit at the Forest Service station for the group campground to accommodate the 1,000 earth firsters and hippies that were going to converge there in July. They came. They disrupted an active logging site, rolled logs and rocks in the road and defecated on all the logging equipment, hung banners. They just made a mess of all their logging equipment in the active logging site.
The fathers of all the people you grew up with.
Yes. 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 It's really a miracle I'm still alive, honestly. Yeah. I mean,
and you shared this with me the other night, and we haven't really chatted. It was a lot of the loggers who were also poachers.
Yes. Yeah. Loggers in the summer, poachers in the winter.
Mm. That's how they chose to put food on their table and a roof over their head.
Exactly. My friends, my Earth Firster friends, we ended up staying down there and continuing to harvest cones. We were climbing giant Sequoia redwood trees together.
You taught them how to do it?
I taught them how to do it. And
was that hard?
I kind of got over my fear of heights as an activist doing the tree sits and setting up the platforms and, climbing logging equipment and scaling coliseums to hang banners to protest stuff.
All that.
I had a fear of heights, and that happened as a teenager when I thought I was going to be a mountaineer, and I went rock climbing with some famous rock climbers, and I took a fall rock climbing, and it just scared the you-know-what out of me.
Yeah.
And but I got over it, through the tree climbing and being the activist. And
those trees are big, so you're hundreds of feet up.
Hundreds of feet up. We used a crossbow to set a line in the tree. So we'd shoot an arrow that had a fishing line attached to it. It was a weighted arrow. And then we would pull a rope up. It was pretty wild. It was adventurous times for sure. A couple weeks after the action, the sheriff rolled up to my camp and hands Mark and I subpoenas to appear in front of the federal magistrate because they're trying to hold us responsible for all the damages that the earthworks did on the active logging site. So we showed up at the magistrate along with all the, news channels and newspapers and cameras, were there. We went into the courtroom. Our attorney, which was an Earth First attorney, went and whispered with the judge, and the judge slammed the gavel down on his thing and said, dismissed. And that was the end of that. In all my activist things, I never ended up getting charged with anything or spending more than, 10, 12 hours in a jail. So
how many times had you been arrested?
Oh, gosh, I think probably like a half dozen times. I got to a place in myself where I was feeling pretty despondent and depressed and not wanting to have anything to do with the world anymore, honestly. And I was caretaking my friends, Sharon and Guy's permaculture farm. I was getting ready to just get on my horse and disappear into the woods, basically. A few weeks before, a woman had called the permaculture center there and inquired and wanted to learn about permaculture. And she came and we met and we fell in love. She was very ill physically from having put herself through UC Berkeley with an environmental degree. And I was kind of somewhat of a basket case with my situation. Through our permaculture connection, I got a job on the Big Island of Hawaii doing a big permaculture installation, and we moved to Hawaii, the Big Island. And I spent 3 years there. It's basically processing everything that had happened to me as an activist. Learning about organic farming and permaculture, it was magical. The Big Island was so good to me. At the same time, I was also psycho-emotionally and spiritually working through what I had experienced as an activist. And even my experiences, on Dillonwood and just all my heart wrench around the environment.
Yeah.
And feeling pretty helpless about what I could do to make a difference. Obviously being an activist really wasn't doing much. To an extent, it brought attention to it, but the logging continued. The devastation of the forest continued. The activists got bombed. The movement got shut down by the FBI. I made it a practice of praying every day. Spirit, show me how to serve this intention to help make the world a better place, and how to raise consciousness and connect people to the natural world and repair that disconnection that humanity has with the natural world. What can I do? How do I serve the world? you know. And that was kind of like my mantra and my prayer for 3 years on the Big Island. And the cone seed companies from Oregon and California had been reaching out to me and were like, come back and harvest cone for us. We need cone for seed. There's a big demand. And I had like $500,000 in orders. And I put together a crew of friends from Hawaii. I think there was about 8 of us. Went to California, bought a truck, all the equipment. This was probably late September 1994. It didn't go well. David free fell out of a tree, broke every bone in his body. He had to have his spleen removed. And then the winter came abnormally early. I was used to working in those woods until like the second week in November. And that year, like 7 feet of snow dumped on us as of the first week in October.
Wow.
And we were done. We were shut out. Some of the guys were just like, forget this. I'm out of here. This didn't work out. And went back to Hawaii. A few of the guys stayed with me, and we went to mistletoe harvesting. Yeah. It was just kind of like the next thing that we could do to make money. Christmas was coming, and the floral industry had a demand for mistletoe. I always wanted to meet David Brower. So he was the one that was working for the Sierra Club in the 60s that saved Mineral King and stopped Disney from developing Mineral King and stopped my neighbor from developing Dillonwood. And it was really his work in the Sierra Club that facilitated me being able to have that experience and also stopped them from putting in this ridiculous, ski resort down there. Would completely change the Tulare County and the Tule River and that whole neighborhood where I grew up in to have that had happened. He worked with the Sierra Club in the 60s and was instrumental in creating a lot of our wilderness areas and protecting a lot of our parks. David Brower went on to creating Friends of the Earth organization, and then he went on to creating the Earth Island Institute. Yeah. Which for a period of time really had some sharp teeth and did a lot of really incredible things. Kind of one of my heroes that I'd never met. And I went into San Francisco, went into his office, introduced myself, shared with him my story. We hit it off and decided to create, a little fundraising project with the mistletoe, with Earth Island Institute. We were like little elves, making these arrangements and selling them all over Northern California and the Bay Area. That's when the next mystical experience happened, Eden. My inherent connection to the divine came through, and my prayers were answered. All that, the affirmations and the asking the divine, the universe for guidance as to what my purpose is to be and how to best serve.
Before you share that, you didn't go back to Hawaii.
I didn't. Nope. I was financially devastated with the failed cone harvest. I had no resources to go back to Hawaii and pretty much just kind of abandoned my farm there in Hawaii.
So tell us what happened next.
There I was, kind of running around Northern California countryside, going into health food stores and florists. And
welcome back from our break.
Thank you.
Let's pick up where we left off with mistletoe and what happened next.
Yeah, it was an interesting time. One piece that I didn't share is that I had a really amazing relationship with my grandmother, and she had enabled me to do a lot of the things that I did. To caretake Dillonwood that last year, to have all my activist adventures, to move to Hawaii, was all supported financially by my grandma, Vera Eckert. And I want to acknowledge that and send a prayer of thanks to her. Part of what was going on at that time, too, was that my father and my uncles were moving Grandma Vera into a care home. I wasn't able to go and hang out with her so much. So there was a lot kind of going on for me emotionally, psychologically, between the cone harvest not working out and what was happening with my grandma and family discovering that she had been financially supporting me. So, there I was, selling the mistletoe. I was in the Napa Valley, where both my mom and dad were born and raised. And I went into the water town of Calistoga.
Mm-hmm.
Calistoga bottled water. Calistoga geysers. Big water town. There was this one-room health food store. And when I opened the door and walked into the store, this huge flash of white light, sparkly white light, went off and filled the whole room with white, sparkly light. Kind of an aura type of light. And it lingered and sparkled, and it was profound. It was profound. And the only other person in the store was the young woman working there. We looked at each other like we had both just seen a ghost. We both experienced this aurora borealis go off inside the store. And we were just like, did you see that? She was like, yeah, did you see that? And we kind of we couldn't believe what had just happened. It was obvious that something had happened that indicated that we needed to know each other. And I shared my story. I think she felt for me, a bit, because it was a rough time. And she offered me a place to stay. She said, you need a place to stay. Give me a call. A couple weeks later, I chose to take her up on her offer. She takes me to her sister's boyfriend's house. One of the things that we hadn't shared yet, Eden, is that my mother's side of the family is Austrian. My great-great-grandfather had a sawmill in Upper Austria in a village south of about 70 kilometers south of Prague. Brian was also Austrian. I show up at Brian's house, Brian and Heather's house. Brian's very excited. We have a lot in common, and there were things that we knew that we were into and that sort of thing. And he had just discovered water, drinking water as a healing modality. Brian gives me the first book, Living Water. And he gives me a Johann Grander water wand, water energizing device from Austria. So Brian's best friend, Kirk Evans, had just returned from Germany, a brilliant fellow, worked for Intel, but he was also really into alternative health. And while he was over there in Germany, he got turned on to Johann Grander. Johann Grander was the pioneer of water energizing technology. And the Living Water book was a biography on the life of Victor Schauberger. So those two things came into my possession.
He gave you the water wand?
He gave me a water wand, and he gave me a copy of the book Living Water.
Had you known of anyone in the United States at that time doing anything around energizing water, structuring water, anything?
Had no idea. No idea. This is like 6 years before Emoto, Messages from Water, the water crystals. We were really on the cutting edge.
I just wanted to remind our audience, for those who didn't catch it, that name that was
Yes.
shared with you when you were in high school at Dillonwood.
Yes.
The voices that were whispered to you.
Yes.
I feel tears welling up.
Yes. Yeah. That instinct or that intuition within myself to trust that in the future I would understand why I was hearing this old German man calling my name and whispering to me grander, grander, would be revealed and explained.
How many years later?
It was 10 years later. The Aurora Borealis in the health food store with Heidi that took me to her sister's boyfriend, Brian, and him giving me the Living Water book and introducing me to Victor Schauberger and Johann Grander, and the Grander technology was explained. So obviously spirit was there. You know, the soul of Victor Schauberger, the soul of my great-great-grandfather had been whispering to me or communicating to me as what I believe was happening. I think there was some ancestral guidance.
I remember you sharing, was there some connection between your great-grandfather and Victor Schauberger?
There may have been. So we're fast forwarding a few years now to 2003, skipping a few stories. That's okay.
We'll go back though, right?
We'll go back. Yeah, go back.
I don't want to miss out on anything.
No, we won't miss out. I've traveled to Austria to meet the Schauberger family and hang out with the Schauberger family. And I'm sitting with Ingeborg Schauberger, who was Victor's, she's still alive, almost 100 years old now. And she is Victor's son's wife. So Victor's son, Walter, went on to carry on his father's work with an Australian gentleman, Callum Coates. We're skipping some stories, but that's okay. And when I sat with Ingeborg Schauberger, I was telling her about myself and telling her about my great-great-grandfather who had the sawmill in Upper Austria, south of Prague. And she says to me, you know, Victor and your great-great-grandfather may have known each other and may have even had worked together. So that was profound. To have this sense of family, to have this sense of connection to nature and to an ancient family, basically. So for those that don't know, Victor Schauberger was Bavarian in ancestry, but grew up in Upper Austria and came from an ancient family of forest caretakers or forest wardens. So for hundreds of years, that's what he and his family did. They were like the protectors, the observers of nature, basically. So, you know, back then there were princes and kings in the Austrian Empire. Austrian Empire was enormous, and those royal families had caretakers that looked after their region or their forest.
Yeah.
And so that's what the Schauberger family did, was they worked for the Austrian royalty in caretaking their forest. So there was certainly a much more harmonious and respectful relationship between the foresters back then. And that kind of ties into some of my knowledge of biodynamics, which Victor was astute to overlapping into forestry. In the ancient, we'll say, biodynamic practices of forestry, they understood that they went by the moon cycles, and trees were very selectively harvested and done with great spiritual integrity and great reverence for the moon cycles and the cosmos. So if they wanted a tree that was going to be fireproof, they knew to cut it only in a certain moon phase. Or if they wanted a tree to have a certain property for maybe making an instrument or constructing or to be rot proof, they knew that that tree was only to be selectively harvested on a certain moon phase.
Yeah, I understand.
So there was a whole ancient practice and Zen and connectedness in forestry, in the ancient forestry practices. Same as the ancient agricultural practices as well. So with the agricultural practices, they knew when to make their biodynamic preparations, what time of day to apply them, how to apply them, how to make their furrows in the soil in a way that was in alignment with the sun and the way that the sun was moving through the sky in the course of a given day, and that those furrows were meandering across the field.
What's a furrow?
Like a row.
A row.
A row, where they would do the planting of the crops. So
they weren't necessarily straight. They followed the land in a way.
Well, the furrows were always meandering, kind of like a snake does, or a river. Mm-hmm. And they did that so that the furrow was never for too long of a period of time in direct contact with the sun.
Okay.
And it's all about understanding soil and soil health and the deities that live within the soil, within the plants, and the whole
What a depth of knowledge.
It's amazing knowledge.
What a depth of knowledge that is non-existent in present day chemical agriculture.
Correct. Or forestry.
And what we've done to the soil, permaculture principles are all about building soil health. That's what we're doing here for 3-4 years now, and we're just going to keep doing it. Just throwing everything down on the ground, the biomass, and building soil health to the point where you can then just throw a seed because the soil's so receptive and ready.
Vibrant and alive.
Yeah.
Everything's there for the seed to do what it's supposed to do.
God, what you're sharing about these ancient practices and your understanding of not just organic farming, but permaculture and biodynamics, it's really wonderful to hear the story of your life and also the depth with which you're sharing about these ancient practices of forestry and agriculture.
Yeah. Victor Schauberger, he was my primary teacher. I had already studied biodynamics and some permaculture. And at that time, when I discovered Victor Schauberger, there was only that one book available.
Tell us the name of that again.
Living Water.
Living Water.
Living Water by Olaf Alexanderson. And it was the only book that was available in English. Olaf spent a lot of time. He actually spent time with Victor.
So they were contemporaries, those two.
Yes. Olaf Alexanderson was Swedish, Sweden, and from Malmö, Sweden. And he actually went on and created a revised version, which my colleagues in Sweden are currently working on revising. So there's a whole new Schauberger book that's coming soon, I know.
Why would you call it a Schauberger book versus Olaf?
So when I say Schauberger books, so Schauberger passed away in 1958, and his son Walter decided to carry on the work at the Pythagoras Kepler Institute in Bad Ischl, Austria. So that's where the family home, the museum, where they hold workshops, is all in Bad Ischl, Austria, which is the Lake Country. And that's where I went to meet and hang out with the Schauberger family in 2003 for the first time.
For someone who didn't finish high school, you sound pretty smart.
Thank you, Eden. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I read a bit when I was younger. During this period of time, I was a voracious reader.
Mm-hmm.
And another really important book that I read at that time, which is more anthroposophic in its roots, was Water, the Element of Life by Wolfram Schwenk and Theodor Schwenk. So the Schwenks created the Institute for Flow Sciences in Herrischried, Germany. And they wrote a few books. The first book was called Sensitive Chaos. The second book was Water, the Element of Life. And that book also came to me about the same time. I don't know if Brian gave it to me or if I went on to find it myself. But I got a copy of Water, the Element of Life, and those were my two books of study.
These sound like scripture for water, like holy grail scripture.
We're getting there.
For water.
Yes, water and nature. So Walter Schauberger continued Victor's work with the help of the Australian Callum Coates. Callum Coates was an engineer. He came to Austria and he spent 25 years with Walter. And Callum, still alive, he's a mathematician. And they wrote the book Living Energies. And Living Energies, speaking of Holy Grail books, is, in my opinion, the Holy Grail of nature books.
Really?
Yes. Which encompasses water. It encompasses forestry. It encompasses agriculture. Basically, it explains the workings of nature, science, biology, mathematics, physics, in the way that's complete. So what they teach us in universities about physics, mathematics, biology, chemistry, they're all incomplete sciences. And they're all
seemingly separate.
And separate. They don't dovetail or synergize in understanding nature in a holistic context. I'll put it that way. We can go into Victor a little bit here right now. I want some help in staying congruent in our dialogue.
I think you're doing great. We're capturing some important historical information that I think the world needs to hear.
Yeah.
I mean, this is information that's seldom shared. I want to make sure we capture the important pieces of it.
Yeah. Victor Schauberger lived from 1885 to 1958. And when he came of age at the turn of the century, he had a choice to go to modern forestry school like his brothers did, or to take his mother's advice and just go into the forest like his ancestors had. He witnessed a perversion of his older brothers in their going to modern forestry school. He felt that it perverted their minds. And so he took his mother's advice, and a prince put him in charge of 100,000 acres of Upper Austria at the turn of the century in 1902. So Victor's like 17 years old.
Victor is 17 years old, and he's overseeing 100,000 acres?
Yes, of Upper Austria.
Wow. It's so interesting. I just want to break in because of how this dovetails with your life experience. It's like you and so many others don't fit into the factory-oriented school system that so many of us grew up within. And you were strong enough. You had enough will to not be I want to say, taken by that system. You had this need to be free and to follow your inner voice.
My connection.
And yes, it wasn't easy. I mean, many of the things that you shared weren't easy.
No.
But yet you kept listening, and I feel like you didn't become a prisoner of our system, our educational system.
Yeah, I didn't want to be homogenized. And that's really what the educational system is. It doesn't support the individuals. It just lumps them all together into one pool and think that everyone is to be educated in the same way. And we're not. We're all individuals, and we each digest and take in information in different ways. And for some of us, we're artists. Some of us are farmers. Some of us are caretakers. Some of us are going to be, nuclear physicists. So I love it that our educational system were to be more sensitive to the individuals and nurture the individuals and their specific calling or purpose or way that they are as individuals.
Yeah, well, in a way, we're seeing it break down before our very eyes.
Yeah.
So please continue.
So Victor Schauberger, 17 years old, he gets put in charge of this huge tract of Upper Austria that was owned by a prince. Schauberger was a keen observer. He loved observing nature in many ways, visually, listening to nature, energetically taking it in, intuitively feeling the nature. Victor was the one who coined the saying, fish don't swim, they're swum. And birds don't fly, they're flown. So all of that indicates that there's a symbiotic relationship within the environment, within the nature, between the birds and atmosphere and the fish in the water. It's not just the might of the bird flapping its wings. It's a symbiosis of energies and phenomena, natural phenomena that are working together that facilitate the flight of a bird or a fish swimming or making its way up a 30-meter waterfall.
It's such an important spiritual concept that you're speaking about right now.
It is. It is.
It's this whole concept from yoga philosophy and other traditions of this, the difference between being a doer and being done by spirit. And with the ego, we've been led to believe that we're in control and we're the doer. And we're missing out this very important spiritual understanding that we're being lived, we're being done, we're being enlivened, that our lives are being made possible through our relationship to all that is. And that's what Victor was talking about.
It's exactly what he was talking about. It's exactly what he was experiencing. Victor went on to a practice of meditating on flowing water. This was in places where possibly no other man or woman had ever been before. Virgin, ancient Upper Austria. In his practices of meditating on flowing water, he got downloaded. Kind of similar to Nikola Tesla and Rudolf Steiner. And in those downloads, he was explained the workings of nature on a dimensional level. Physics, the biology, the mathematics, everything. And Victor was able to come back and bring that information and apply it practically to inventions and technologies and systems of working with nature.
I just want to break in and say that some of the devices that you sell
Yes.
use the Schauberger technology.
Yes. My whole approach to water, especially drinking water or water inside a home, is very purely Victor Schauberger inspired.
And we have those devices at Loma Sagrada here that
Yes.
are devices that come from all different places in the world
Yes.
to not just clean the water, and we'll get into this, but
Yeah.
to restructure it and energize it.
Enliven it.
Create
what I like to refer to as living water. The concept of living water, energized water, allows and facilitates a much more holistic context of looking at the earth in its primordial state, looking at ourselves in a primordial state, and helping us regain that primordial connection to the life-giving essence of the nature. Therefore, the life-giving essence of ourselves, connection, consciousness. Another word for connection in Schauberger's context is consciousness.
These are deeply essential spiritual terms.
It's amazing how much the things that Victor Schauberger did were aligned with ancient Vedic traditions. His study of spirituality, nature, science were very entrenched in Goethe, in Pythagoras, and Johannes Kepler's works. The other really important thing, Victor, he had these experiences. He started to apply what he learned practically to nature, to technology, to systems and technological systems. And back then in Austria, the practice of harvesting trees was not harmonious. And what they were doing back then was they'd go up on a hillside, cut down a whole bunch of trees, allow them to roll down the mountain to the river, and then the river to carry them to the village to where the sawmill was. And this was very, very inefficient and very, very destructive to the environment. And they only actually captured a small amount of the trees. Many of them were, not usable by the time they reached the village in that practice. So one of the very first things Victor did was he engineered a flume system that mimicked nature and meandered the trees on a sheen of water. So in ways, the trees actually were being levitated on a sheen of water down these specially engineered flumes to transport the trees safely to the village and to the sawmills.
Really?
Yes.
I have never heard of this.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that he did. And
that sounds like incredible engineering.
It was amazing engineering. It was, phenomenal engineering. It was unfortunate that led to even more logging, accelerated the logging. And Victor, it would be a much longer interview to share all the details and what happened. But in the end, he came out of the forest and began to condemn modern forestry and calling it for what it was and saying that it was all wrong and they shouldn't be treating the forest this way. This was in the 1920s. And that outspokenness led to the formation of the Green Front in Germany. The Green Front is what became the Green Party. So to a huge extent, it was Schauberger's early outspokenness that led to an extent modern environmentalism as we know it. So I refer to him sometimes as a great-great-grandfather of environmentalism. Other things that he did or that happened to Victor was the war era. And he was sequestered by Hitler during the war and made to lead teams of scientists to develop all kinds of esoteric technologies. So the war with Hitler, yes, there was the whole piece with the Jews, but actually it was a race for technology at that time. That was what was going on. And that's what the history books don't tell us about, is really what was going on behind the scenes. And the British and the Americans and the Russians all wanted what Hitler had.
It's an interesting piece of the story.
It's an interesting piece of the history and the story.
There's so much that
there's
we
a lot.
don't know.
There's a lot that we don't know.
There's
Just say that.
There's the covering, the story. Yeah. And there's so much underneath that.
It's very similar to life story of Nikola Tesla and the things that he did. But Schauberger, really his work and his teachings and the books that are available now, the works that Callum Coates did, to me are the holy grail of nature books. And they should be in universities, and kids should be learning about all of this. What it comes down to is understanding implosion, which is a term that unfortunately is misused these days in a negative connotation. Implosion is life. Implosion is the energy that's at work when life is alive, when it's building. It's the energy inside a living organism is implosion. Yin and yang, masculine and feminine, implosion and explosion, entropy and extropy. They're all the opposites. So with Victor, he gifts us the wisdom and the knowledge and the mathematics and the physics and the biology of implosion to understand what is implosion and how to build technologies and systems that function out of implosion. Whereas explosion, we're only harvesting a fraction of the energy, and there's a huge amount of waste and pollution associated. Explosion is when something's decaying or dying. There's explosive energies at work, as how Victor would explain it. Whereas with implosion, there's energies that are facilitating and building and conducting life. Mm-hmm. Explosion is death and dying and decay. Entropy and extropy. Callum Coates created a diagram that can be shared that explains all of that.
Sure. We'll include that.
Yeah, we can include that. So for me, discovering Victor Schauberger was profound, and it was all enthralling, and I just knew that I had to dedicate my life to his work to a huge degree and involve myself with it as much as I possibly could. So, I teamed up with Brian and Kirk. We kind of banded together and had this brother and rootsy connection between the three of us. Kirk got invited to the U.S. Psychotronics Conference in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. All kinds of far out, free energy, alternative health, stuff.
Okay.
That was 1995. I got my Living Water book. I got my water wand, my Johann Grander water energy device. I was working on an organic farm outside of Carmel, near Tassajara. And I read the book, and I read the book, Water, the Element of Life. That was a very important book. The Schwenk family with the Institute for Flow Sciences, they were the first to create photography that depicted water as a living substance or showed water as a living substance. So drop photography is a very rudimentary, basic way of showing the wave patterns in water. And under magnification, They take a picture of a droplet of water impacting another droplet of water. And under that magnification, you can see the patterns that are created. And if it's a water of really good life-filled properties, a lot of life force, living water, it's going to create all these Rosetta, spiraling, vortexing, rose-type patterns that start from the center and then grow outwards. It's beautiful. And in the Water, the Element of Life book, there's all these photography, and the Schwanks had this laboratory in Germany where they did all these sorts of flow experiments with water. And one of them was the drop photography method, which was developed actually in the late 50s. So we're going back quite a ways. The Germans and the Austrians, they're so far ahead of us with all this sort of stuff. And if the water is of a poor quality, it'll be flatlined in that magnification. So what they did, the Schwanks, they took some water from a stream coming out of the Black Forest in Germany. They did their drop photography of that water. It created these beautiful Rosetta patterns. And then they took a sample of the same stream downstream of the village after it had been in contact with the sewage and whatever was going into the water, and it was flatlined. So reading the Living Water book, reading Water, the Element of Life, happened for me when I was working on this farm outside of Carmel early 2005. I started to develop a relationship with Brian and with Kirk. And after finishing the work on the farm, we kind of banded together. We did the U.S. Psychotronics Conference together. We went up to, I think it was Lopez Island in the San Juans, and gave a talk to a group of permaculturists. We went to San Francisco and we did the Whole Life Expo in San Francisco with Grander Technology, with all the books that were available to us at the time, the drop photography, other things that we caught on to and wanted to share with the public. I stayed involved with the Grander Technology. Over the course of those next few years, I got in touch with the Schaubergers. I got in touch with Callum Coates, and Callum Coates finished his writings. The Living Energies book came out, I think, in 1995, 96. And then Callum took Victor's writings and translated them into a series of books called the Eco-Technologies. It was a 4-part series. It starts out with The Water Wizard is the first part in the series. Nature as Teacher is the second part. The third part is The Fertile Earth, where there's a lot of focus on what happened with Schauberger agriculturally and the things that he learned from the ancient Austrian farmers agriculturally. And then the last book was called The Energy Evolution. So those are really the hardcore Schauberger books that continue to be available. Living Energies was a very technical book because Callum is an engineer, and it was quite hard for the average person to digest that book. So Alec Bartholomew, who was the publisher of all those books, went on to rewrite Living Energies into a book called Hidden Nature, which is amazing and is much more accessible and easier to digest by the average person. And Alec also did a wonderful job of tying in environmentalism and speaking to that, to the implications environmentally of Victor Schauberger's works. And in an interview with Callum Coates back in probably 96, 97, this was actually an interview that the Grander family used to promote Grander Technology. And what Callum Coates said in that interview was, all of our efforts to heal the environment will unfortunately be nothing but a Band-Aid without Victor's principles being applied. I ended up bouncing around a few years on some different farms, was in New Mexico. All that was available to me for work at that time was to be an arborist, tree climber, tree trimmer. There was really no other work available. And this was 1999. And I had an unfortunate near-death work-related incident with a tree coming down on me that took me out for 2 years. And
Did it break your back?
it ruptured a disc in my neck. So, and it bruised my spinal cord. So I had a cervical fusion, I have a plate in my neck, and I have a bruise on my spinal cord, which left me with a condition that affects me from the neck down. Not too much. I still do everything that I used to do, but with not quite the same vigor that I used to do it. So, and I believe that I'm still healing from that experience as well. And I believe that I can achieve complete healing from that eventually. So, there I was in North Carolina and had this near-death work-related incident. I got a whole bunch of Grander water. So Grander makes this special water that comes in these. I think I gave you one when we first met.
Yeah.
A little jug of some Grander water. And I drank a whole bunch of Grander water. I was in the hospital for about 3 weeks.
Is that from Austria?
It's from Austria. Yeah. It's from Grander's special spring inside Austria that's been energized and everything.
Yeah.
And started my recovery from the spinal cord injury. And I drank a lot of Grander water. And
a lot of living water.
A lot of living water, energized all my water. It was basically a 2-year journey with workman's compensation and the spinal cord injury. So come August of 2001, I get my cash settlement from the state of North Carolina and workman's compensation. It was $150,000. And I bought tickets to travel to Austria, to Australia to hang out with Callum Coates, to England to go hang out with Alec Bartholomew, to Sweden to go hang out with Kurt Hallberg and the guys at the Institute for Ecotechnology there in Malmö, Sweden.
Your heroes.
My heroes, all, people I had been connected with. And I was like, yeah. And Kirk was going to go with me. Actually, I reconnected with Kirk. And so I had tickets for both of us that I bought with my cash money. And September 11th happened. And that whole trip got scuttled because of September 11th. I decided to do Pioneers. And at that time, the Schauberger family was producing these handmade copper gardening tools. That's a whole nother chapter of Victor Schauberger, is that he identified that modern agriculture was using the wrong metal, ferromagnetic metals in agriculture, and iron plows severely debilitate the soil and contaminate the soil with iron and short circuit the soil from being able to conduct its life energies and chi and prana. So Victor went on to create the spiral plow, which is made out of a phosphor bronze or an allanized copper that was allanized with tin. And the spiral plow moved soil the same way a vole or a mole moves soil in a vortexing pattern. And the family, that was a real thing, the golden spiral plow that Schauberger invented and did trials in Turkey with. They did all kinds of crops, like potatoes, wheat, and they showed that the vitality, the productivity of the crops that were plowed with his spiral plow were off the chart and way exceeded the yields of crops that were grown in fields that had been exposed to conventional modern iron plows. So the Schauberger family went on many years later to create this handmade garden tools out of phosphor bronze. So part of what I did with my cash settlement was import the first inventory of Schauberger handmade copper garden tools. I took those and grander technology and all the Schauberger books and the Schwank books and everything and brought it to Bioneers. And that was amazing and a lot of fun. And I met Chuck Beatty, who was the president of the of the Biodynamic Association at that time. And he says, hey, we're having a conference up in Sebastopol at Summerfield School. Why don't you come and do a presentation and have your table there? And so I did. And I'm, still kind of a drifter at this point. I don't have a home anywhere. I'm camping out with my folks and friends and that sort of thing. And I go there and I do the biodynamic conference at Summerfield School in Sebastopol, and I meet this woman, Tamara Slayton. And she is a renowned anthroposophist. And she traveled all over the world, all over North America, Canada, to the different Rudolf Steiner centers, giving workshops on death and dying and young women's issues, all in accordance to Rudolf Steiner. And Tamara saw me there, and she never heard of Victor Schauberger, and she loved the tools and completely resonated with the concept of energizing living water. And she's like, come with me, young man. I'm going to mentor you. And so I ended up landing in Sebastopol and kind of taken under the wing by Tamara Slayton. And she and I went on road trip across the country and traveled to Rudolf Steiner centers, and she did her thing and I did my thing.
Wow.
And I ended up staying in Sebastopol area and developing my business.
Tell us what your business is now.
Yeah,
What is your business?
My business now is TrueSpring Water Quality Solutions. So I use that term TrueSpring very poignantly and strategically because it's an actual natural scientific term that Victor Schauberger utilized to identify a type of spring. So if you study the Schauberger books, Living Energies, Hidden Nature, in those books, he explains all the different types of water that occur naturally on the surface of the earth. You have seepage springs, you have rainwater, you have river water, you have lake water, you have ocean water, you have seepage springs, and you have true springs. A seepage spring does not run a complete hydrological cycle. It's water that only goes so far into the earth, and then it hits a hard strata of rock and then comes back to the earth's surface. A true spring is very similar to what Aka was describing in the past podcast interview of what he experienced in Jamaica.
And for those of you who aren't hip to this reference, Aka Jackson is who I interviewed for a podcast recently. It's the number 4 podcast called Natural Mystic. And, or number 3, I think. And Nevin listened to that, so that's what he was referring to.
Yeah. So true springs emerge from very, very deep inside the earth. So deep inside the earth, there's ancient aquifers. And those ancient aquifers come into contact with a molten layer. And under pressure and steam, that water is pushed up to the earth's surface. So in this context, in this natural phenomena, it's a growth process like any other living organism. Water is birthed deep inside the earth or it's conceived would be another way of, it's more of the conception of the water between the ancient aquifer and the molten layers, and then being pushed back to the Earth's surface through all the crystals, minerals, and stones. It's a maturation and a growth process where the water is fed and ripened and matured.
What brings it up? Pressure?
The pressure.
The pressure from the heat, or
From the heat. Exactly.
So it's okay.
Yeah.
And it comes through fissures or
rocks and stones and fissures.
Yeah.
And then it emerges frequently, the earth as a living organism. We're imagining the earth in its primordial state before man took the whales from the ocean, before man cut down the ancient forest, looking at the earth in its primordial state. There was a symbiotic relationship between that spring and the ancient trees, where the spring emerged. And so imagine, the morphic field of that ancient old growth forest and the energy, the life force energy that existed in that old growth forest as that spring is emerging from the ground that's traveled and birthed, conceived so deep inside the earth, and then matured and ripened and grown through the different stratas of minerals, rocks and stones and crystals before emerging at the surface of the earth.
Wow.
So it's a whole growth process. And a true spring actually, when it emerges from the earth, is somewhat oxygen depleted. And as Akka was mentioning about the spring that he experienced in Jamaica, it was very cold.
Duns.
Yeah, Duns River in the Duns Spring. So true springs are, one way of identifying a true spring is by its temperature of about 4 degrees centigrade. It's very, very, very cold water.
Wow.
And it's also frequently very oxygen depleted water. So the ancients, caretakers, forest custodians, in Victor's teachings, knew not to drink the water directly at the spring where it emerged out of the ground.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, it could actually make you sick or ill.
Because a lot of people take water from springs.
It depends on the spring and what's been going on. But a real true spring, it's oxygen depleted, and you don't want to drink from it until it's been cascading down the waterfall and it's had a chance for the atmospheric oxygen to mix into the water.
Wow. Okay.
So that's why I named my company TrueSpring, is because it's the purest, it's the most living, it's alive.
What's your intention behind this company of yours? Because everything that you've done has been born of passion and born of listening. You've led a very unconventional life.
Yes.
Yeah, there's an aspect of you that's different than most humans.
Thank you.
There's something different and special about you, and so I want to know what is your passion and what is the intention behind your company, TrueSpring?
Consciousness for water. That's our motto. And we also utilize Victor's motto. Victor had a motto that he created, which is to copy and comprehend nature. So my vision, my intention is to bring consciousness to water, to the natural world, to nature, to reconnect people and their consciousness to the natural world, and specifically to a huge extent through the quality of water that they drink on a daily basis.
And so your company not only creates water that's purified, but it's also water that's energized. How would you describe it? Because I can't describe it how you would describe it, but the water's purified, but then what else?
It's a biomimicry process. So I'm looking at how Mother Nature wants to give us water in its most purest, most alive, living form, and that is that of a true spring. So it's been my quest for many, many years to create the best drinking water system in the world. And unfortunately, there's no one single drinking water system that is the best. If you want to have the best, it has to be a custom system. So there's components from different manufacturers, different inventors that we configure together to create a living water or a true spring quality of water. And that all starts with what we refer to as our water birthing mama. That's our fond reference to the piece of equipment that's called the Aqualite. It's manufactured by Aquathin Corporation in Florida. And it takes the water down to a laboratory grade purity. So that means that it's more pure than distilled water, and it's more pure than ordinary reverse osmosis water. So this system, it's been recognized by Build Magazine. It was awarded the #1 drinking water purification system in all of the US and the UK by Build Magazine. It carries a platinum international rating, which exceeds NSF and North American standards as far as the degree of purity that's created from it. And in Schauberger's terms, it creates a juvenile water or a hungry water. And that's why I call it the water birthing mama, because it's always making a newborn, juvenile, hungry baby water, which mimics what happens deep in the earth with the start of a true spring and the ancient aquifer being in contact with the molten layers. That's where the water is birthed, really. And then the process of it coming through all the minerals, crystals, and stones to the Earth's surface is done with other components after the water birthing mama. So
like the Tensui, right?
Like the Tensui, yes, the water from heaven. Yeah, that's a piece of equipment. It originated in Asia, Japan, and it's filled with about 25 different minerals, stones, crystals. Tourmaline is inside there. Special ceramic beads, far infrared ceramic beads, ceramics that release hydrogen from the water. And then we have some other componentry, a piece of a filter. It's not a filter, it's a mineralizer from Austria that contains 71 trace minerals. And then we have another mineralizing component that has calcium and magnesium in it as well. So the water is, after being purified, being born from our water birthing mama, it goes through the Tensui and other componentry to be fed and matured and ripened physically with all the minerals. And then from there, we have other componentry that addresses the life force of the water. So I'm sure a lot of your listeners understand the principles of homeopathy. Okay. So it's one thing to address the physical quality of something. So to remove the chlorine or remove the fluoride or the lead from the water. After that's been done physically, the energy of those contaminants is still there. And the homeopathic residue, the energetic signature of that chlorine, lead, fluoride is still present and has to be addressed. Yeah.
I had never thought of that. I haven't studied enough.
It's okay.
But I'm learning now.
Yeah. Yeah. I had no idea either when I was younger.
I didn't know that. I thought if you remove the chlorine and the fluoride and the heavy metals with the purification equipment that most conventional purification equipment remove, that you would have your clean water that was healthy to drink, not knowing that there's a negative homeopathic signature that's impregnated the water.
Yes.
So how do you deal with that?
Energizing. So you're exposing the water to a field of energy that erases that harmful energy and imparts a life-giving force or a chi or a prana to the water.
Wow.
And we have, a few different systems. There's a lot of things out there on the market.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in the industry for, 30 years and keeping my finger on the pulse of everything that's available in the world and all the inventors that are available. And I believe the systems and equipment that we're offering is the best of the best.
And so what are some of the components?
Yeah, so we have from Italy, the Aquafy that runs the water through a Fibonacci spiral, and an egg that creates a cosmic antenna of sorts that's channeling cosmic energy onto the water as it passes through the Fibonacci spiral. That's one mechanism. We have the UMH Energizer from Austria.
And that's like the gold collar, right?
That's the gold units. Yes.
What do those do and how do those work?
There's a lot of different mechanisms inside the UMH Energizer. I love it. It's really, they're the oldest. They actually were building water energizers before Grandeur was, come to find out. I thought Grandeur was the oldest one, but the inventor at UMH, he is even older than Grandeur's.
Are there moving parts in that device or not?
None of the energizers that I offer have any moving parts. Okay. So in the UMH, there's a few different things. There's bioenergetic metals at work. There's crystals, there's stones, there's shungite inside there. And most importantly are these specially programmed vials of water. So it's a vibrational technology. Entrainment. So these vials of water have been set into a vibrational state, and they're encased inside the unit along with the other crystals, mineral stones, and bioenergetic metals to create a very powerful unit, a very powerful device to both erase the harmful homeopathic information that's left behind after the physical purification, and then endow the water, entrain the water, energize the water, enliven the water.
Mature the water
energetically with a chi and a life force. I'm sure many of your listeners have seen aura photography. They've probably seen Masaru Emoto's Messages from Water crystal books. We have auras, we have fields of energy. So to be drinking on a daily basis a water that has a life-giving field of energy that's feeding us, not just physically, but also energetically, is a really special, wonderful thing and a gift that we're able to do that.
How can people learn more about what you're offering?
Yeah, they can visit TrueSpring.com. TrueSpring.com.
And you're creating custom systems for people anywhere in the world. We're in Costa Rica, and you're here with me right now because we've had your system for 3 years now, and we needed your support just because of life in Costa Rica with energy surges and salty air and humidity. And so we needed your support. And I'm so grateful that our water, what are they called again? Water
birthing mama.
Our water birthing mamas are up and running, and all the other equipment. And I affectionately call our water Fountain of Youth water here. We have 2 point of sources here. We have the whole property is being purified, but then for the actual drinking, we're using the point of sources that have the technology that you're speaking about right now. The clean water is everywhere, but then we're energizing it and reprogramming it and maturing it at 2 points of source for drinking and cooking and such.
Yes. Yeah. Technically, it's hard to create it's difficult to create that degree of pure water from a whole house system or a whole property system. It'd be very, very expensive. It'd be very hard to maintain, and it would waste a lot of water too.
Yeah.
So for drinking water, we have the point of use, under kitchen sink drinking water systems.
Point of use.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. And then we do a lot of other things. Education is a huge focus. You want to go to the education page. There's some amazing articles there on what is living water, cellular hydration, amazing articles that we have. So I encourage your listeners to first start by reading the articles that we have. And then we have another aspect of the business where we work on lakes and ponds and wastewater. So we have all natural, some of which are anthroposophic inspired water technologies that we utilize on lakes and ponds and wastewater, effective microorganisms. We work with the flow forms, which are functional flowing water art that was inspired by Rudolf Steiner, that has sacred geometry built into them, into the flow. You find those often at Waldorf schools and Rudolf Steiner centers and in biodynamic farms. We do flow forms also.
You've used the word anthroposophical a couple times, and I just wanted to let everyone know that that's the spiritual philosophy of Rudolf Steiner, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah. The way of describing it.
Yeah. Waldorf schools.
Yeah.
Rudolf
My
Steiner.
kids had the great benefit of going
Did they go to Waldorf?
to Waldorf.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So it was really a blessing to have them go to a school that honors the creative process, the whole brain, and creating humans that are creative problem solvers.
Yes.
So I really am appreciative, and they're all older now. Our youngest is 18 and our oldest is 25, and they've all greatly benefited from that holistic spiritual education that Rudolf Steiner brought into the world. I can't say that I'm the beneficiary. I went through a regular public school education, and I've been recovering ever since.
Well, you'll be the beneficiary of them taking really good care of you when you're older.
Yeah. Nevin, thank you so much.
Thank you, Eden.
What a rich life that
Thank
you've
you.
lived, and I'm honored and blessed to know you. I'm grateful that you've helped create a state-of-the-art custom water purifying, water energizing system that our plants and humans and animals are all benefiting from.
Yeah.
So thank you for the great work that you're doing, for the life that you're living, for your advocacy, and all you've been through to bring you to this point in your life. You're a beautiful human being.
Aww. Thank you, Eden. Thank you for having me here. I'm honored to be a part of your community and the work that you're doing to spread consciousness and connection. Connection is the medicine. It truly is.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. It's a wrap. Thank you for joining me on Connection is the Medicine. This podcast is sponsored by the Connection is the Medicine Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to co-creating connection to self, community, nature, and spirit. I hope this conversation inspires you to connect with deeper meaning and purpose in your life. To learn more about our offerings at True Nature in Carbondale, Colorado, and Loma Sagrada in Nosara, Costa Rica, please visit connectionisthemedicine.com. Blessings on your day, and I look forward to visiting with you again soon.